The gym smelled of sweat and chalk and something heavier, something that made the hair on the back of necks stand on end. The students whispered among themselves, trying to stifle giggles and smirks. They had heard the news that a single mom, a Navy SEAL, had been asked to teach karate, and they all assumed it was a joke. Some of the older kids laughed nervously, thinking it could not be serious. The teachers exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes, others hiding nervous smiles because deep down they did not know what to expect. She walked in through the double doors, her boots echoing against the polished floor. Each step, deliberate, measured like a predator, aware of everything around her. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanning the room, not missing a single detail. Students froze mid-whisper when she passed some, gripping their chairs instinctively, and a few daring ones nudged their friends, trying to provoke laughter. But the laughter died on their lips as they caught her gaze. It was not angry or cruel. It was a gaze that cut through pretense and forced attention. They had heard stories about Navy SEALs, about battles and missions, about training that pushed men and women past limits. But none of them thought it applied here in their small middle school gym. Their imaginations tried to reconcile the woman standing in front of them with the images of a soldier they had seen in movies or read about online. She stopped in the center of the gym and took a slow, deep breath, the kind that seemed to draw the energy of the room into her chest. Students leaned forward slightly, intrigued, afraid, curious, wondering what would come next. She picked up an empty water bottle from the floor, flipping it between her fingers with ease and precision, a motion so smooth, so effortless, that it seemed almost impossible. The bottle spun through the air, and she caught it without looking away from the students. Their jaws dropped. Some of the boys swallowed hard while the girls whispered to each other, trying not to stare too obviously. She set the bottle down carefully and turned her attention to the principal, who was standing awkwardly to the side, clutching a clipboard, expecting him to speak, but he found no words. The silence in the gym was thick enough to feel heavy, and some students shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the sudden tension. The whispering stopped as if an invisible hand had pressed pause on the room. He tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in assessment, like she could see every thought, every doubt, every joke they had prepared in their minds, and she would know if they tried. She spoke softly, not raising her voice, but every word carried a weight that seemed to settle in the bones of those listening. She said, "Today we are going to learn more than punches, kicks, and stances. We are going to learn control, focus, discipline, and courage." And those words sank into the room like a stone thrown into still water. Some students stiffened their posture, unsure what courage meant in this context. Others looked at their friends, trying to gauge their reactions. The teachers who had mocked the idea now felt a strange knot of respect mingled with fear. Because she was not just a mom or a volunteer, she was someone who had faced dangers far greater than they could imagine, and she was here now, standing in front of their children, ready to teach. She took a few steps forward, her movements controlled, deliberate, slow, yet fluid, and the gym seemed to shrink around her presence. The students could not look away, their eyes following her every motion. Some held their breath as if afraid to break the spell she cast. The floorboards echoed under her boots as she shifted her weight from one foot to another, demonstrating a stance without saying a word. Her body spoke in silence, and the room absorbed it like a living lesson, without explanation, without warning. She bent low and sprang up into a kick that sliced through the air, clean and precise. Some students gasped, unable to follow the motion, but unable to look away. Her hands moved with calculated speed, forming blocks and strikes that seemed both defensive and graceful. She paused in the center of the gym, surveying the reactions around her. Some students were wide-eyed, some mouths hung open, and a few of the bolder boys backed away, slightly unsure how to respond. She smiled faintly, not a mocking smile, but one that carried calm confidence as if to say, "This is not a game, this is real, and it matters." The principal swallowed hard, feeling suddenly inadequate as he watched the woman in front of him command attention with no authority but the kind that could not be challenged. She picked up the water bottle again and tossed it into the air, this time catching it behind her back without looking. And the students collectively gasped. Some eyes went wide and some whispers escaped like leaves in the wind. Some of the teachers covered their mouths, trying not to laugh nervously, but the humor had left the room replaced by awe. The gym lights reflected off her eyes, making them look sharper, brighter, like twin points of fire scanning the room for readiness. She motioned for a student to come forward, a boy who had been laughing earlier, and his bravado faltered the moment he realized she meant him. He stepped forward hesitantly, unsure what to do, and she tilted her head, watching him with patience, yet unyielding resolve. She did not raise her voice. She did not scold. She simply waited for him to meet her halfway, and the tension in the gym grew heavier as everyone held their breath, waiting for the first move, waiting for the first spark of action. That would reveal what this session would truly be about, and in that moment the room understood the joke had ended and something far more serious and thrilling was about to begin. The boy stepped forward, his knees shaking slightly and his hands curling into loose fists. He had imagined this would be easy a joke, a moment to laugh. But the moment he saw her eyes on him, the room seemed to shrink, and the laughter vanished like smoke. She tilted her head slightly, watching him, every muscle in her body relaxed, yet ready poised like a panther, waiting for a sign of movement. The other students leaned forward, their curiosity mingled with fear. They could feel the tension crackling, like electricity through the gym. The boy attempted a half-hearted jab, and she moved with the grace of a shadow, sidestepping effortlessly, her footwork so precise it barely made a sound, but it shifted the energy of the room in an instant. He stumbled back, and the air seemed to tighten around him, his confidence draining like water from a leaky cup. The students gasped collectively, some covering their mouths, some gripping their chairs as if holding themselves upright could protect them from the awe radiating from the center of the gym. She let the moment stretch long enough to make it sink in the reality of what they were witnessing, and then she spoke softly, her voice carrying across the room. Smooth, calm, deliberate, every word measured. Like a soldier giving orders without yelling, "You must focus, control your movement, understand your balance and your mind, or it will betray you." The boy blinked rapidly, trying to process the words while his heart pounded in his chest. She moved toward him slowly, each step measured, careful not to intimidate, yet every movement radiated authority. He shifted instinctively, stepping backward, trying to create space, but she was already there, guiding him with the lightest touch on his arm, showing him stance, correcting his posture without raising her voice. The gym seemed to vibrate with anticipation, each student frozen in attention, waiting for what would happen next. A whisper ran through the crowd. "Did you see that?" Some shifted nervously, others held their breath, unable to tear their eyes away. Her hands moved with silent elegance, demonstrating a series of blocks and strikes in a fluid motion that seemed impossible to replicate, yet mesmerizing to watch. The students tried to copy her, and stumbled. Some laughter escaped, some muttered curses under their breath, but she moved among them, correcting gently, a hand here, a foot there, guiding them into positions that looked effortless on her, but had taken them years to master. Her presence filled the room with a gravity that demanded respect. Some students leaned closer, trying to catch every subtle motion, while others watched from a distance, unsure if they dared move. She stepped back and allowed the boy to try a kick again, his first. Attempts were shaky, uncoordinated, but she moved to adjust his hips gently, his foot placement, her fingertips barely grazing him yet correcting him instantly. The room held a collective breath as he managed a clean strike, finally his eyes widening, in surprise, disbelief, and excitement. He looked at her, and for a moment a spark ignited a mixture of fear and admiration. The students around him gasped, some whispering quietly that she was like a force of nature. She walked past the rows of students, letting her gaze meet theirs one by one, silently challenging them to focus, to believe that they could accomplish more than they thought. The teachers who had smirked earlier now stood silently uncertain what to say, their skepticism replaced by awe. She stopped in the center again and lifted her hands, demonstrating a rapid series of combinations moving faster than the eye could follow. Each strike precise, each block exact and yet fluid, as if she were dancing and fighting at the same time. The students tried to follow, some failing, some succeeding, some frozen in disbelief. The energy of the room shifted from amusement to intensity, curiosity to admiration and fear, to exhilaration. She paused again, letting them absorb what they had seen before, speaking softly to the group. You will fall, you will fail, you will struggle. But every time you rise, you grow stronger. Every stumble is a lesson. Every failure, a chance to improve. She gestured to the boy, now standing taller than before, his confidence beginning to rebuild. He mirrored her movements hesitantly at first, then with more certainty, as if drawing strength from her presence. The other students started to mimic her, demonstrating focus and determination. She moved among them, correcting, gently offering encouragement and subtle guidance. Her eyes never left them, scanning every movement, assessing their focus, patience, and willingness to try. Her presence seemed to demand something more than physical effort. She demanded courage. She picked up a jump rope that had been discarded in the corner, spinning it in the air and catching it behind her back effortlessly. The students watched wide-eyed, whispering incredulously at her skill and agility. Some teachers shook their heads, muttering impossible some bit, their lips unable to express the awe swelling in their chest. The boy now stood ready to attempt another move. She nodded slightly and he launched forward, striking with surprising precision, guided by her instruction. The gym erupted in gasps and quiet murmurs of disbelief. She stepped back, letting him feel the achievement, letting the moment land in his chest like a weight he could finally carry with pride. The tension in the room shifted from intimidation to inspiration, excitement humming through every student and teacher present as they realized this was no ordinary karate lesson. This was a lesson in courage, control, and perseverance, and they had front row seats to watch a real warrior transform. A moment of doubt into a surge of potential. The principal cleared his throat nervously, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He had expected a simple demonstration, maybe a few polite moves and some polite applause. But what unfolded before him was beyond anything he had imagined. The SEAL mom stood in the center of the gym, her stance unwavering, her gaze sweeping across the students as if measuring their attention and resolve. Each movement she made radiated a confidence and precision that seemed impossible. She gestured for the students to form a line, and they did hesitantly, their movements stiff, uncertain, some glancing nervously at their peers, trying to gauge what was expected. She began with a simple step forward, a block, a strike, her voice calm but every word carrying the weight of authority. Focus, balance, control, she said, repeating the words slowly and deliberately like a mantra that penetrated the room. They mimicked her slowly, at first their movements jerky and uneven. She moved among them, correcting posture, adjusting hands, feet, gently but firmly. Her presence alone commanded attention, and every adjustment carried a silent lesson in discipline and respect. Some of the boys whispered under their breath, "This is impossible," but their whispers were swallowed by the intensity of the room. The air seemed to vibrate with energy and anticipation. Each student felt as if she could see through them, reading every doubt, hesitation, and fear. She stopped suddenly and turned to a boy who had been smirking, earlier daring to show he was unafraid. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes locked on his, and the gym held its collective breath. He raised his fists, half joking, half nervous, but she did not flinch. She tilted her head slightly and motioned for him to try a kick. His foot wavered in midair, and he stumbled. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder, correcting his stance. Her touch was soft, yet carried the authority of someone who had faced real danger. He blinked rapidly, realizing that what he had thought was a joke was in fact a test not of strength, but of focus and will. The students leaned forward, watching the interaction, silently absorbing the tension and excitement building in the room. Some of the younger kids shuffled, their feet nervously unsure how to imitate the precise movements they had just witnessed. Her voice broke the silence, guiding them step by step, showing them how to coordinate movements, breathe with control, and keep their minds focused. She moved. From student to student, a blur of motion, correcting, adjusting, and encouraging. Her eyes never left theirs, her gaze steady, unwavering, commanding respect, and inspiring confidence. In one motion, she grabbed a stray gym mat, flipped it effortlessly into a defensive stance, demonstrating a technique so smooth and fluid that some students gasped involuntarily. The teachers who had smirked earlier now watched in stunned silence, whispering among themselves about her skill, precision, and grace. They realized they had underestimated her abilities completely. Some students began to attempt more complicated combinations, hesitating, then finding rhythm as her guidance helped them navigate movements they had never imagined they could master. The energy of the gym shifted from apprehension to exhilaration, from doubt to determination. She paused in the center, allowing the students to catch their breath, and then she shared stories in short bursts about missions, discipline, perseverance, and resilience. Her voice was calm, yet every word carried weight, painting pictures of courage and tenacity. Her words were more than stories. They were lessons embedded into the physical movements the students were attempting and into their understanding of themselves as capable individuals. The boy who had stumbled earlier now stood taller, his kicks, sharper movements, deliberate and precise under her watchful eyes. The others noticed his transformation, and a spark of inspiration lit across the room. Some of the more skeptical students began to push themselves harder, attempting combinations with more focus and intention. She walked among them, correcting subtle mistakes, adjusting angles of limbs, showing how small changes made big differences. The gym was filled with the soft rhythm of breathing, the shuffle of feet, the occasional thud of mat against floor, and the hum of concentration and excitement. Her presence dominated the room without the need to shout or raise her voice each movement, each glance, each correction. A silent command that commanded respect and inspired courage. The principal watched helplessly as the students transformed under her guidance, some showing confidence for the first time, others discovering strength they had not known they possessed. She paused again in the center and motioned for all students to gather around. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. She lifted a small jump rope from the floor and spun it between her fingers effortlessly, showing a combination of skill and control that seemed almost supernatural. Some students whispered, how could she be human? Yet there she was, demonstrating flawless technique with a calm smile. Her eyes scanned the room, catching every doubt, every flicker of hesitation, and every glimmer of excitement. She nodded slightly to the boy who had challenged her earlier, signaling it was his turn to attempt a full combination. His movements were now controlled, precise, and flowing, yet still carrying a hint of uncertainty that only made the audience lean closer to witness the unfolding transformation. The other students watched silently, learning without words the power of focus, discipline, and courage in motion. The air in the gym was electric, charged with the energy of potential realized through guidance, correction, and example. She stepped back, letting the students take the lead, their movements a reflection of her teaching and the spark of determination she had ignited. The principal could not tear his eyes away, realizing that what he had thought would be a light-hearted joke had become a masterclass in skill leadership and self-belief that none of them would forget. The SEAL mom stood in the center, calmly observing letting the students absorb the lesson and the weight of their own growing abilities. Her presence alone a reminder of what could be achieved with focus, courage, and the willingness to rise above fear. A sudden noise erupted from the back of the gym. A boy shouted out, laughing at first, thinking this was all a game, daring to challenge the intensity that had gripped the room. He raised his hands, half teasing, half defiant. The SEAL mom turned slowly, her eyes locking onto him, and in that instant, the laughter died, as if someone had sucked all air from the space. The students leaned forward, their hearts hammering in their chests, unsure if they were about to witness punishment or a lesson in courage. She stepped forward silently, each footfall deliberate, and measured the echo of her boots cutting through the tension like a blade. The boy took a step back instinctively, his bravado fading as he realized that this was no ordinary teacher, no ordinary demonstration, and certainly no ordinary lesson. The room held its breath. The other students froze in mid-motion, unsure whether to intervene or stay perfectly still. She stopped a few feet from him and raised a hand signaling calm her. Movements were slow yet fluid, precise yet effortless. She motioned for him to try a kick. He hesitated, his foot hovering in the air, a mix of fear and disbelief written across his face. She tilted her head slightly, watching him, every muscle in her, body relaxed, yet poised, ready to respond in a heartbeat. The students gasped collectively, their eyes wide as they watched the moment stretch the air thick with suspense, like the calm before a storm. The boy attempted the kick half-hearted at first, and she moved like a shadow, intercepting effortlessly, correcting his stance with the lightest touch on his arm. He froze, his eyes wide, her touch gentle yet commanding, showing him instantly how to align his body. The movement was so subtle and precise that it felt almost magical. The room seemed to vibrate with intensity, anticipation, and awe. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a calm authority across the gym. "Focus, balance, control," she said, repeating each word slowly, emphasizing the weight of each concept. The students listened silently, internalizing her words, their hearts racing, their hands gripping the mats for support. Some of the younger kids shifted nervously, unsure how to mimic the precise motions, but she moved among them, adjusting their stance, their hands, their feet, each correction silent, but full of meaning. Her gaze swept across the room, catching every flicker of doubt, every spark of curiosity, every ounce of hesitation and determination. She paused and demonstrated a combination of blocks and strikes, her movements a blur faster than eyes could follow, yet completely controlled and fluid. The students watched in awe, some gasping, unable to believe the precision, the speed, the grace. They tried to imitate her, stumbling, some collapsing to the floor, others striking out of sync. But she corrected with gentle authority. Her presence filled the room with energy and discipline, at once the air thick with concentration, excitement, and a newfound respect. The boy who had challenged her earlier took a deep breath and launched into a kick again, this time with more confidence, his body aligning under her guidance, his movements sharper, more deliberate and controlled. She nodded slightly, letting him feel the victory, the momentary triumph, the taste of accomplishment as he landed the move cleanly for the first time. The students erupted in quiet murmurs, some whispering to each other, some wide-eyed, unable to contain their awe. The teachers who had doubted her watched silently, realizing they had underestimated her skill, knowledge, and ability to inspire. The gym seemed alive, charged with electricity and potential. She moved among the students, guiding, adjusting, encouraging each one in turn, her voice calm, her gaze steady, her hands precise. She lifted a small training stick from the floor, demonstrating a sequence that combined balance, coordination, and timing. The students attempted to follow, stumbling at first, then gaining confidence as her guidance corrected every error. Her shadow moved across the room, a blur of motion. Teaching without shouting, instructing without force, correcting without judgment. The boy who had challenged her now moved with determination, his kicks flowing into blocks, into strikes each step, gaining momentum, confidence, and poise. She nodded approvingly, letting the others see that focus and courage could overcome fear. The energy in the gym shifted from suspense to exhilaration, from fear to excitement, and the students began to push themselves beyond what they thought possible. The SEAL mom paused finally in the center, allowing the students to experience the moment alone, to internalize the lesson, to feel the power of their own growing abilities. The gym was quiet, except for the rhythm of controlled breathing, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional thud of movement. She spoke softly, letting her words sink into every student. You will fall, you will fail, you will stumble, but each time you rise, you become stronger. Each failure is a lesson, each effort a step toward mastery. The students absorbed the weight of her words, their eyes wide, their hearts racing, the tension of the moment giving way to exhilaration and understanding. She stepped back, observing silently, letting the energy of the room settle, her presence a calm force in the eye of a storm. The principal stood frozen, unable to speak, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed, realizing that the joke had transformed into a lesson far beyond karate far. Beyond physical skill, it was a lesson in courage, resilience, focus, and the power of belief in oneself. The students shifted nervously, glancing at each other, realizing that they had been part of something extraordinary, that their perceptions of limits had been challenged, and that a single woman had commanded their attention, inspired their courage, and left a mark that would linger far beyond the walls of the gym. The students were still catching their breath from the intensity of the previous drills when she stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room slowly and deliberately. Her presence commanded attention without a word. Each movement she made radiated controlled discipline and quiet power. She raised her hands slowly, and the room went silent, anticipating what would come next. She began to speak softly, telling stories of missions, deployments, and moments where courage and focus were the only things that had kept her alive. The students leaned in, their eyes wide, absorbing every word, imagining places they had never been, dangers they could not comprehend, and yet her words carried lessons that were simple and profound. You must learn to control your fear. She said your mind is the battlefield before the body even moves. Each word sank into the room like a stone thrown into still water. The principal shifted nervously, realizing that what they were witnessing was not just a karate demonstration. It was a lesson in resilience, confidence, and leadership. She moved among the students now, her footsteps measured and silent, correcting small mistakes, adjusting posture and stance, guiding them through combinations with patience and authority. The students tried to follow each instruction, some stumbling, some regaining balance, some whispering quietly to themselves, trying to match her precision. She paused near a boy who had been fidgeting in the back and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, showing him how to shift his weight correctly. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, he felt a surge of courage he had not known before. The other students watched quietly, taking in the demonstration. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, yet carried a subtle power that spoke louder than words could. Her presence was magnetic, drawing attention and inspiring confidence all at once. The gym was alive with the rhythm of controlled movement and soft murmurs of realization. The students began, to push themselves harder, attempting combinations they had thought impossible, some managing sequences correctly, others stumbling and laughing nervously. She moved among them, correcting hands, feet, angles, and stances, each adjustment subtle but powerful, each touch a lesson in control and focus. Some of the older students who had been skeptical began to whisper quietly about her skill, precision, and calm authority, realizing they had misjudged her entirely. She paused in the center of the gym and lifted a training pad, spinning it effortlessly between her hands, showing a sequence that required perfect timing, coordination, and reflexes. The students gasped collectively, some stepping back, some leaning forward, their eyes wide in disbelief as they tried to follow her movements. Her gaze swept across the room, catching every flicker of doubt, hesitation, and determination. She nodded slightly to a student who had been struggling, signaling that he was ready to try a complete combination. The boy took a deep breath and launched into the sequence under her watchful eyes. His movements were tentative at first but grew smoother with each repetition. The students watched silently, absorbing the lesson, the tension in the air transforming from suspense to exhilaration. Her voice broke the silence softly yet firmly, reminding them, focus, discipline, control, and courage are more important than strength alone. The principal stood frozen, watching in awe, realizing that what he had thought would be a simple karate class had become an immersive lesson in life itself. The SEAL mom moved from student to student, guiding, correcting, and encouraging their progress, each movement precise and deliberate. She paused near a girl who had been quietly observing and motioned for her to try a kick. The girl hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes, but with a gentle nod from the SEAL mom, she launched forward, her kick landing cleanly for the first time. The gym erupted in quiet gasps and murmurs of admiration. The other students followed suit, trying combinations with more focus and determination than before. She moved among them seamlessly, correcting and guiding each one. Her presence dominated the room without shouting her authority and skill speaking volumes. Her stories intertwined with physical movements, teaching more than karate they taught. Courage, resilience, patience, and the power of persistence. Each student experienced a transformation, some small, some profound, realizing that they were capable of more than they had believed. The boy who had challenged her earlier now stood taller, his movements flowing smoothly into strikes and blocks, each step building confidence and poise. The other students noticed, and inspiration rippled quietly through the group. Her eyes swept the room one final time, signaling that the lesson was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. Each student understood now that focus, control, and courage were tools they could carry far beyond the walls of the gym. She paused, allowing them to absorb the moment, the energy in the room thick with anticipation, excitement, and newfound confidence. The principal finally found his voice, whispering quietly to himself in disbelief, realizing the transformation taking place was nothing short of extraordinary. The SEAL mom stood in the center, calmly observing her students, letting them feel the power of their own growth, letting the lesson sink deep into their minds and hearts. She had turned a moment meant as a joke into an experience that none of them would ever forget. A lesson in more than karate. It was a lesson in life, courage, resilience, and belief in oneself, and the students knew instinctively that they had been part of something rare, profound, and unforgettable. The gym felt electric, charged with energy and anticipation, as the students lined up again, their hearts still racing from the previous lesson. The SEAL mom moved among them, her eyes sharp and observant, scanning every movement, every expression. Her presence alone seemed to tighten the air, making it heavier, somehow more intense. The principal stood to the side, unsure where to look, his mind struggling to comprehend what was unfolding before him. Teachers who had doubted her skill now watched, in awe, silently acknowledging they had underestimated her. The students fidgeted nervously, some whispering quietly to their neighbors, but the whispers died quickly as her gaze swept across the room, stopping briefly on each of them, commanding their attention without a word. She gestured for them to begin a sequence again, and they obeyed hesitantly, their movements stiff, uncertain. She moved through the rows, adjusting hands, feet, posture, subtle touches that corrected mistakes without embarrassing anyone. Each movement she made was precise, yet fluid, her motions carrying authority and grace simultaneously. The students tried to follow her each step, each strike, each block, feeling the weight of concentration settle on their shoulders. Some stumbled. Others managed small victories, their eyes lighting up as she nodded approvingly. Her voice cut softly through the tension. Remember control, focus, and courage. These are more important than strength alone, she said, and the students absorbed the words. Like water to dry earth. Each repetition of movement, each correction, each demonstration carried a silent lesson about perseverance, resilience, and the power of belief in oneself. She paused suddenly in the center of the gym, a shadow of silence falling over the room. The students froze, unsure what was coming next. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned the room, assessing focus, attention, and willingness to continue. She moved toward a group of older students who had been whispering doubts and smirking quietly, their arrogance waning under her steady gaze. The gym seemed to grow quieter somehow, the air thicker and heavier as they sensed the intensity of the moment. They stepped forward cautiously, their feet shuffling uncertainly. She gestured for them to attempt a more advanced combination, a sequence that demanded timing, precision, and complete focus. Their initial attempts were sloppy, hesitant, uncoordinated, but she moved among them seamlessly, correcting each detail, adjusting arm angles, shifting feet, and guiding them toward fluidity. Her hands barely touched them, yet the effect was immediate, their movements slowly transforming under her guidance. The boy who had challenged her earlier now executed a perfect combination, striking, blocks and spins flowing seamlessly. She nodded slightly, letting the others see what could be achieved when one focused completely and trusted in guidance. The energy of the room shifted from tension to exhilaration, from doubt to determination. The students began to push themselves harder, attempting the sequence repeatedly, some stumbling, some achieving success, each small victory fueling excitement and confidence. She moved among them like a ghost, silently observing, guiding, correcting, encouraging every small effort. Each student became aware of the strength in their own body, the control in their movements, and the power of their focus. Her presence dominated the room without shouting, her authority inherent in every motion, every glance, every correction. The principal watched in disbelief, realizing that what he had thought would be a light-hearted lesson had transformed into an immersive experience, teaching life lessons, courage, discipline, and resilience. Her stories of missions and training were now intertwined with the physical movements, each student performing the sequences with more understanding, more determination. Her calm voice interjected occasionally, giving direction, encouragement, or subtle correction. Her eyes scanned the room constantly, never missing a flicker of hesitation or doubt. The younger students began to imitate her with more precision, their movements less stiff, more fluid, gaining confidence with each attempt. Some of the older skeptical students whispered quietly to each other about her skill, realizing they had underestimated the power of her experience and the effectiveness of her teaching. She stopped briefly near a girl who had been struggling and placed her hand lightly on her shoulder, guiding her into proper stance. The girl blinked, wide-eyed, her fear giving way to a surge of courage. She launched into a kick, landing cleanly for the first time, and the students around her gasped silently. Some of them whispered words of admiration. Others stared in awe, realizing that the impossible could be achieved when guided with patience and precision. The gym felt alive, the rhythm of movement, breathing, and determination filling every corner. Each student absorbed the lesson physically, mentally, and emotionally. She paused again in the center, letting the students internalize the progress they had made and the lessons they had absorbed. Her voice, soft but firm, cut through the silence. Remember each stumble. Each failure is a lesson. Each step forward a triumph, she said, and the students nodded internally, realizing the truth of her words. The principal finally exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed, understanding that the joke had become something extraordinary. A lesson in courage, resilience, control, and focus that none of them would ever forget. The SEAL mom moved silently among the students, observing quietly, letting them feel the strength and confidence growing within them, letting the lessons sink deep into their minds and hearts. She had taken a moment meant for amusement and transformed it into an experience that would leave a permanent mark on each student. A lesson far beyond karate, far beyond physical skill, and yet inseparable from it. The room buzzed with excitement, anticipation, and quiet awe. Her presence an anchor and a guide, transforming doubt into determination, fear into courage, hesitation into action. The gym had transformed into a crucible of energy and focus, every student standing taller, their movements sharper, their eyes wider with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and excitement. The SEAL mom moved among them like a shadow, her presence commanding attention without a word. Every step she took echoed in the silent expectation of the room. Her gaze swept across each face, reading hesitation, determination, and courage, and responding without words. She stopped suddenly near a cluster of the toughest boys, the ones who had whispered doubts and smirked earlier. Their bravado faltered under her quiet scrutiny. They shifted nervously, glancing at one another, unsure how to react. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips, as if to say they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The boys stepped forward hesitantly, their fists clenching their feet, shifting instinctively. She motioned for them to begin a sequence, a combination far more challenging than anything they had tried before. Their initial movements were clumsy, jerky, uncertain, but she moved among them, fluid like water, correcting angles, adjusting stances, and guiding their balance. Her hands barely touched them, yet each touch transformed. Their posture, their movements more precise, more fluid, more confident. The students around them watched silently, holding their breath, the tension in the air thick as fog. Some of the younger students tried to mimic the advanced sequences, stumbling, but pushing forward, inspired by the display of skill and courage unfolding before them. The principal felt his heart pound in his chest, realizing that what had started as a joke had become a masterclass in discipline, courage, and focus. She paused. In the center, letting the boys attempt the combination again, their movements improving rapidly with her guidance. Each step, each strike, each block carried the weight of determination and focus. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation and excitement. Her voice cut softly through the tension. "Remember, control, precision, and courage are your allies," she said, her tone calm yet commanding. The boys nodded internally, absorbing the lesson, struggling, but trying again with more focus, their determination growing. The SEAL mom moved fluidly from student to student, correcting subtleties in hand positions, foot placement, and body alignment, each adjustment invisible to the untrained eye, yet transformative in effect. The students began to understand that mastery was not about strength alone, but about control, discipline, and resilience. Some of the toughest students who had doubted themselves began to move with surprising precision and confidence. Their eyes met hers briefly, and a spark of understanding passed between them. She nodded approvingly, letting them feel the surge of accomplishment. Her shadow passed over the room, moving seamlessly from one student to another, her presence dominating without intimidation. Her movements demonstrated flawless technique and grace inspiring the students to push beyond their perceived limits. Each repetition of the sequences carried lessons in courage, focus, and persistence. Her voice interjected occasionally, guiding, instructing, correcting, and encouraging. The gym was alive with the rhythm of movement, the soft thud of feet against mats, the controlled breathing of students, and the almost imperceptible hum of energy filling the space. The younger students tried to match the older students' efforts, stumbling sometimes, laughing quietly, but always pushing forward, inspired by what they were witnessing. The SEAL mom paused near a girl who had been hesitant all class and placed her hand lightly on her shoulder, guiding her stance. The girl blinked, up at her wide-eyed, and then attempted a kick, landing it cleanly for the first time. The other students gasped silently, some whispering quietly to themselves, some exchanging amazed glances, realizing that focus and courage could overcome fear. Her eyes swept across the room once more, signaling that the lesson was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The boy who had challenged her earlier now moved fluidly, executing combinations with precision and power, his movements reflecting the lessons absorbed. The students around him watched silently, learning without words the power of focus, courage, and determination. The principal finally exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the transformation unfolding before him, realizing that this was no ordinary lesson. This was a lesson in life, courage, resilience, and belief in oneself, woven seamlessly into physical movement. The SEAL mom paused, letting the students internalize their progress and achievements, letting the energy in the room settle into a quiet hum of anticipation and confidence. Her gaze met each of theirs for a fleeting moment, silently conveying pride and expectation. She spoke softly. Remember, every challenge, every stumble, every attempt is a chance to grow stronger. And the students absorbed her words, their hearts pounding, their minds racing. The energy of the gym was electric, charged with excitement and quiet awe. Her presence anchored the room, transforming fear into determination, hesitation into action, doubt into courage. Each student felt the surge of confidence building within them, the realization that they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. The SEAL mom allowed the moment to stretch, giving the students time to absorb their growth, to feel the power of their own determination. The room was filled with unspoken understanding, respect, and inspiration. Her authority unquestioned yet gentle, her teaching unforgettable and profound. She had taken a group of hesitant students filled with doubt and laughter and transformed them into a room brimming with confidence, focus, courage, and readiness for anything that came next. The gym was silent except for the rhythm of breathing, the shuffle of feet, and the soft thud of movement as the students lined up again. The SEAL mom stood in the center, calm, poised, and commanding. Her eyes swept across each face, reading determination, hesitation, fear, and excitement in a single glance. The principal shifted nervously, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene unfolding before him. The students were no longer the timid, hesitant children who had first entered the gym. They had changed. Each movement they made carried purpose, focus, and intent. Her presence had transformed them like a sculptor shaping clay into forms of strength and resilience. She began a demonstration, a sequence far more complex than any they had attempted. Before her body moved with precision, grace and fluidity striking, blocking, spinning, and flowing seamlessly from one motion to another. The students watched wide-eyed, absorbing every detail, the angles, the timing, the speed, and the control. Each motion seemed impossible, yet effortless. Her gaze met theirs, silently challenging them to try to match her effort. The first student stepped forward hesitantly, attempting the sequence. His movements were shaky at first, but with her gentle guidance, his confidence grew. His strikes flowed more naturally, his blocks timed more accurately. She nodded approvingly, letting him feel the surge of accomplishment. The other students followed, attempting to mimic the sequence, some stumbling, some executing. It perfectly, each repetition building focus, determination, and courage. The seal mom moved among them, correcting posture, adjusting balance, shifting feet, and guiding hands, subtly, her presence alone, transforming hesitation into confidence. The energy of the gym grew electric, the tension from before replaced by exhilaration, excitement, and quiet awe. Some of the students whispered to each other quietly, amazed by how much they were capable of achieving under her guidance. The principal watched, unable to comprehend how a single woman had taken a group of children and transformed them into focused, disciplined participants in what felt more like a performance of skill and courage than a karate lesson. She paused near the boy who had challenged. His movements now flowing smoothly, executing the full sequence with precision and power. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and he felt a surge of pride and determination. The other students watched, absorbing the lesson in courage, focus, and self-belief. The seal mom demonstrated a rapid combination, moving faster than the eye could follow, yet controlled, precise, and fluid. The students attempted to mimic her movements, some stumbling, others succeeding, but all learning the weight of concentration and control. Her hands moved like shadows, correcting subtleties invisible to most yet transformative in effect. The energy of the gym was palpable. Anticipation, excitement, and quiet tension mixing into a charged atmosphere. The students began to push themselves harder, attempting the sequence repeatedly, some achieving success, others stumbling and trying again. Each effort met with subtle guidance and encouragement from her. Her presence dominated the room, commanding respect, inspiring courage, and instilling confidence without a single harsh word. The younger students, who had been timid, now stood taller, their movements sharper, their focus clearer. The older, skeptical students who had doubted her skill now moved with precision, determination, and awe, realizing they had underestimated the power of her experience and guidance. She paused finally in the center, letting the students feel the weight of their own achievements, the growth they had undergone, the confidence building. Within them, each student felt a surge of pride, a spark of courage, and an awareness of their own potential. She spoke softly, her voice calm, but carrying authority. Remember, each effort, each stumble, each success builds the foundation for the next step. The students absorbed her words, internalizing the lesson, understanding that courage, focus, discipline, and perseverance were far more valuable than strength alone. The principal exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the transformation before him, realizing this was not just a karate lesson, but a life lesson. A lesson in resilience, courage, and self-belief, woven seamlessly into movement. Her gaze swept across the room one final time, signaling that the climax of the lesson had arrived. Each student understood. The moment was theirs to seize, to show what they had learned, and to embody the lessons she had imparted. The room was alive, charged with energy, anticipation, and quiet awe. The students moved with precision, fluidity, and intent, their bodies a reflection of the discipline, focus, and courage instilled by her presence. She moved silently among them, observing, correcting, encouraging, and guiding each one. Her shadow fell across the floor like a promise, a reminder of what could be achieved with focus and determination. The boy who had challenged her earlier executed the final sequence, flawlessly landing each strike, each block, each spin perfectly, his face lit with pride and exhilaration. The other students followed one by one, some succeeding, some stumbling, but all pushing themselves further than they had imagined possible. The seal mom paused in the center, allowing the moment to stretch, letting the students internalize their growth, the power of their focus, and the strength they had discovered within themselves. The gym was alive with quiet murmurs of admiration, excitement, and respect. Her presence anchored the room, transforming fear into determination, hesitation into action, and doubt into courage. Each student knew instinctively that they had been part of something extraordinary, a lesson in courage, discipline, focus, and self-belief that would remain with them far beyond the walls of the gym. The gym was filled with a quiet hum of energy, anticipation, and awe. The students stood in their final formation, each face shining with focused determination and a newfound confidence that had been absent when they first arrived. The SEAL mom stood in the center, her presence calm, poised, and commanding. As always, her eyes swept across the room, absorbing the transformation she had orchestrated silently, measuring the courage and focus now evident in each student. The principal shifted nervously, unsure what to say, overwhelmed by the power of what had unfolded in front of him. The students no longer resembled the hesitant, uncertain group who had entered the gym. They were stronger, faster, more confident, their movements sharp, precise, and deliberate. Every step, strike, and block a reflection of the lessons they had absorbed. Her presence had transformed them. She raised her hands slowly, and the room went silent, expecting her next command. She began a demonstration. One final sequence, a combination of strikes, blocks, spins, and movements far more complex than anything attempted before. Her body moved with fluid grace and controlled power. Each motion precise, each step deliberate and yet seamless. Her eyes locked onto the students, silently challenging them to match her effort to summon their focus, courage, and determination. The first student stepped forward, his legs trembling slightly, but his eyes bright with determination. He began the sequence, executing each movement with careful precision. His blocks aligned, his strikes sharp and controlled. She nodded approvingly, letting him feel the surge of accomplishment. The other students followed one by one, attempting the complex sequence, some stumbling at first, some executing flawlessly, but all learning the weight of concentration, control, and courage. The SEAL mom moved among them, her hands adjusting feet angles, posture subtly, yet effectively transforming hesitation into confidence. Her presence radiated authority and inspiration without a single harsh word. Each correction, each touch a silent lesson in focus, discipline, and self-belief. The gym seemed to pulse with energy, the rhythm of movement and breathing filling the space, anticipation, excitement, and quiet. Tension vibrating in the air. The younger students who had been timid now moved with growing confidence and determination. The older, skeptical students who had doubted her skill were now executing movements with precision and awe, realizing the extent of her expertise and guidance. She paused near the boy who had challenged her earlier, his movements flowing smoothly, executing the full sequence with power and precision. His eyes met hers briefly, and he felt a surge of pride, exhilaration, and courage. The other students absorbed the display, learning the value of focus, persistence, and self-belief. The SEAL mom demonstrated a rapid combination, moving faster than the eye could follow, yet controlled, precise, and fluid. The students attempted to mimic her movements, some stumbling, others succeeding, but all striving to push beyond previous limits. Each repetition carried lessons in courage, focus, and perseverance. The energy in the gym was electric, charged with exhilaration, anticipation, and quiet admiration. The students pushed themselves harder, attempting the sequence repeatedly, some succeeding, others stumbling and trying again. Each effort met with subtle guidance, encouragement, and correction from her. She moved silently among them, observing, guiding, correcting, and inspiring her presence, a quiet force, transforming hesitation into determination, fear into courage, doubt into action. The principal watched helplessly, realizing that a moment meant as a joke had become a profound life lesson in courage, resilience, discipline, and self-belief. Her gaze swept across the room one final time, signaling that the climax of the lesson had arrived. Each student now understood the depth of what they had learned, the strength of their own potential, and the power of focus, determination, and courage. She paused, allowing the students to absorb their growth and achievements, the energy in the room thick with exhilaration and quiet awe. The boy who had challenged her earlier now executed, the final sequence flawlessly landing each strike block and spin perfectly, his chest rising and falling with exhilaration and pride. The other students followed one by one, some succeeding, some stumbling, but all pushing themselves further than they had thought possible. The Seal Mom stood silently in the center, letting the moment stretch the students, internalizing the lessons, the growth, the courage and focus they had discovered within themselves. The principal exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed, understanding that the joke had been transformed into an extraordinary lesson that would remain with each student far beyond the walls of the gym. The Seal Mom finally spoke softly, her voice calm yet firm, each word carrying the weight of authority. Experience and encouragement. You have learned more than technique today. You have learned courage, focus, and the power within yourselves. The students nodded, their hearts pounding, their eyes wide with realization. The gym was alive with quiet murmurs of admiration, excitement, and respect, her presence a guiding force that had transformed a room of hesitant, uncertain students into confident, capable individuals. Each student knew instinctively that they had been part of something extraordinary, that the lessons of courage, discipline, focus, and self-belief would remain with them forever. The Seal Mom smiled faintly, the faintest hint of pride in her eyes as she observed the culmination of the lesson, the transformation of her students, and the quiet awe that filled the room. The principal and teachers stood silently, their disbelief and admiration mingling. They had underestimated her, and now they understood the full impact of her presence, the depth of her skill, and the power of her teaching. She had taken a joke and turned it into an experience that left everyone speechless, an unforgettable lesson in courage, resilience, focus, and the limitless potential that lies within those willing to rise above fear and doubt.